Jurors, you may be seated. It is the morning of June 27, 1941. My name is Avira Chaudhry, the judge assigned to this case in Sector 013, Court of 5. Thank you, jurors, for being here today, without which we would not be conducting this trial as it is. Please refrain from speaking out of turn. You will be silenced if speaking out of turn, even when addressing the jurors directly. Before we begin the case, let us establish that we may refer to the district attorney as the prosecution. Please rise as I introduce you. Mr. Wong and Ms. Chu. You may be seated. The defendant, Lucien Mersol, is defended by his lawyers today. Counsel, please rise as I introduce you. Mr. Gruber and Ms. Porter. You may be seated. Mr. Wong, is the prosecution ready?
Yes.
Mr. Gruber, is the defense ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
You've been summoned here today for a criminal case brought up by the Algerian police on July the 11th of 1940, charging the defendant, Lucien Mersol, with the death of an Arab. He claims that he did kill the Arab by gunshot, but denies murdering out of self-defense. At the end of this case, you'll be asked to determine whether Lucien Mersol is guilty of murder in the second degree. It is my sworn duty to lead the case using objective terminology and guiding you with the law. The law states that murder in the first degree is premeditated and with the intent of bringing harm upon the victim, while murder in the second degree is unpremeditated, but with the intent of inflicting bodily harm or bringing death upon the victim. The job of the defense is to prove the defendant's innocence. If they fail to do so, the defendant will be declared guilty of murder in the second degree. Current French-Algerian legislation retains the death penalty for a series of offenses, including espionage, insurrection, drug trafficking, terrorism, spying, poisoning, and aggravated murder, as stated by Article 12. Section 3 of Article 12 also states that murder in the second degree is punishable by law and warrants the death penalty. The job of the prosecution is to convince you that the defendant is guilty. If they fail to do so, the defendant will walk free. At the end of this case, you'll be asked to determine whether Lucien Mersol is guilty of murder in the second degree. We will now begin examining the case. The prosecuting attorneys will go first. You may call upon the first witness. Yes.
Opening statement.
Good morning, members of the court overseas. My name is Sophia Chu, and I'm the junior prosecutor for this case on June 27, 1940. My associate, Samson Wong, is the head prosecutor. Lucien Mersol is being charged with second-degree murder of an Arab man on July 11, 1940. On a beach in Algiers, the defendant, Raymond Sintes, and Masson were provoked in an altercation with three Arab men. Although Raymond's arm was cut, he was the one who started the conflict. Later that same day, the defendant, wielding a gun, and the victim, wielding a knife, had a confrontation, resulting in the defendant shooting the victim 5 times. Our aim here today is to prove that the defendant was unjustified in his overwhelming use of force. He brought a gun to a knife fight, provoking a reaction of self-defense from the Arab man as an excuse to shoot him once and then another 4 times just for the sake of it. Our goal here today is also to prove that this man is a danger to society. He seems to have no clear morals or emotions, as shown by his indifferent reaction to the death of his mother, his murder of a man, the beating of a woman, or anything else. He is unpredictable. There is no knowing what he will do next. Members of the jury, the prosecution will
that is true. However, I think that after a certain amount of time, he would have come to the realization that he would need to see his mother once again before she was buried.
Do you believe that his interfering schedule had anything to do with this after the math of his mother's death?
I do not think so, because I think that if his mother passed away, that would have been a significant enough of an event for him to clear his schedule for at least a certain amount of time to come make a time to see her.
No further questions?
You may be seated. Does the prosecution have further inquiries?
We have no
Please
further
remain
inquiries,
seated.
Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I have something to add if I may use that clock?
Stay silent. Prosecution, you may call upon your second.
The prosecution would like to call Alfred Leroy, the caretaker of the old age home, to the stand. Do you swear to tell the whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
You may be seated. So, please introduce yourself to the court.
My name is Alfred Leroy. I am 64 years old. I am the caretaker of the old age home in Marinago, and I used to live in Paris until about 5 years ago.
Thank you. And how long have you worked as a caretaker?
The 5 years that I've lived here.
What was Marcel's response when you offered to unscrew the lid on the casket for him to see his mom?
He said no, that he did not want to see her, and when asked why not, he said that he simply didn't know.
Please tell me what he did next to his deceased mother's casket.
He first drank a cup of coffee and then proceeded to smoke a cigarette and then offer me one as well.
And how did you feel about being offered a cigarette?
I thought it was inappropriate, and I didn't want to, but I thought it more rude to deny him, so I did accept.
You have no further questions at this time.
You may be seated. Does the, now you may cross-examine.
Good morning, Counselor. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things with you. Is that okay?
Based on,
Sorry. I was wondering, why was Marcel so impatient to see his mama?
Impatient?
As stated in your affidavit, it said Marcel had become impatient to see his mama. This is a clear contradiction to what the prosecution had just said, where Marcel did not want to see his mama at all. But now he wants to quickly and impatiently see his mama.
It seemed as though he wanted to quickly get the whole ordeal over with. He didn't seem to care or want to spend the time to grieve. He just wanted to get it over with and get back to his life.
Now, as my co-counsel had mentioned earlier, do you think people deal with grief in different ways, and maybe being apathetic or kind of shutting yourself off, especially seeing or being in the same place your mama had died? Do you think that has to do with the kind of apathetic nature of Marcel?
I do think that is a possibility, yes.
One more question. You mentioned in the funeral process in Italy how it was a lot slower. And the funeral process in Italy was a lot slower than the funeral process here in Algeria. Would you say that the very short time he had with his mama before she was buried left him bitter, and bitter enough to, let's just say, offer you a cigarette?
That is possible, but it did not seem as though he was bitter, rather emotionless and indifferent toward the situation.
Members of the jury, we should make note of the fact that Mersol for just this action? Why are we not persecuting the caretaker or the director, who also had left you behind? Why is it only Mersol that is being ridiculed for leaving him behind, when everyone else who was attending the funeral did so?
You could have said something.
So could have anyone else. No further questions, Your Honor.
You may be seated. Does the prosecution have further inquiries? And Mr. Sintes, please stop using a cigarette.
Mr. Brest, thank you for answering all these questions today. I have a couple more if we can come up. Sure. On the day of the funeral, you said you had fainted a couple times, correct?
I think I said it once.
All right. And in this time period, how long do you think you were out for?
Could not answer that.
Thank you. The defense has claimed thus far that his actions are not a reflection of his disrespect, that his actions were due to heat, and that an action alone cannot signify that the defendant is disrespectful and has a disregard for people. Yet when you look at the entire picture, when you look at this man smoking a cigarette next to his mother's casket, when you look at this man sleeping next to his mother's casket, we can, in fact, state that this man has no regard for these funeral proceedings. Furthermore, the defense has asked, why leave this man behind when everyone else could have stopped and helped? But what the jury must remember is this is a case against the defendant, Lucien Mersol. Furthermore, this is a case in which we are looking at the character of Lucien Mersol, and thus it is important that we evaluate all of his actions prior to the crime and his emotions before. Thank you. No more questions at this time, Your Honor.
Mr. Wong, you may be seated. Mr. Perez, you are excused. You may resume your seat. So, should we
Want to cut it?
cut it here? Okay. We'll resume with the trial. And no one helped Mr. Perez.
What's that?
He said no one helped Mr. Perez.
That's it? Okay, so they probably will want to interview some of the witnesses and some of the people today. We're gonna have to speed up tomorrow. We'll never get through because
You may be seated. We will now resume or the case Mersol versus the Arab. Court is now in session. Prosecution, you may call upon your witness.
Your Honor, the defense is calling upon the witness.
Oh, you already gave up on it. Defense, you may call upon your first witness.
The defense would like to call upon Celeste Monet to the stand, please. Bless you. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Celeste, can you describe your relationship with the defendant Mersol, please?
He was a good friend of mine. He went to the diner often that I own. He goes about every day.
Was about every day? Okay. In your affidavit, you had mentioned how Mersol's unfortunate circumstance was due to bad luck. Do you think you could elaborate on this a little more?
Elaborate.
Elaborate on this bad luck. What is this bad luck that you had mentioned in your affidavit?
He just had bad luck. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. So you would say that if he wasn't put in this unfortunate circumstance where he had to defend himself against the Arab, would he just go out randomly with the intent to kill?
Of course not.
Okay. One last question for you. Would you say his hard-to-read personality, once again, you had mentioned this in your affidavit, would you say his hard-to-read personality would make him seem heartless or apathetic?
It might make him seem that way, but he isn't really.
No further questions, Your Honor.
You may now cross-examine.
Did the defendant pay for the citizen suspended? And what did he do?
Please raise your decibel level.
Did the defendant pay for the services rendered at your place, the restaurant?
Well, I don't see how that's relevant, but those are just details between the two of us. He was a good friend of mine.
All right, well, could you please answer the questions to us?
No.
Raise your decibel level.
Mr. Celeste, please answer the question.
No. He didn't always pay.
Okay, thank you. No more further questions.
Does the defense have any further inquiries?
No, Your Honor.
You may call upon your second witness, and you may be seated.
Prosecution would like to call Marie Cardona to the stand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
You may be seated. Marie, could you please state your relationship with the defendant?
I'm his girlfriend.
Okay. Please describe to the court the day you reconnected.
It was June 10th of 1940.
did not, was not active in the altercation. However, he helped to warn Mr. Sintes that one of the Arab men had a knife, which resulted in the cutting of Mr. Sintes' face and arm.
So after the slashing, can you remind the court what the group of Arabs did? They ran away, did they not?
Yes.
They ran away. Now, let me ask you this. Was there any way the defendant knew that the victim would come back to the beach after they had run away?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like this to be added to the court record. Lucien Rousseau had no way of knowing that the Arab man would come back, thus removing the possibility that the Arab man's murder was premeditated and there was no intent to kill.
He is not being charged with premeditated murder in second degree, which is unpremeditated.
Yes, sir. My client thus far has shown no signs of aggression, only seeking to make others happy and defending his friends. No further questions, sir.
You may now prosecute.
Were you drinking prior to this altercation?
It is true that during lunch there was some wine being passed around.
And did you participate in the altercation by punching one of the Arabs?
That is correct.
Ms. Chu, please raise your left hand.
And although you said one of the Arabs made a gesture towards you three, who first started fighting in the altercation?
Well, the Arab man made a gesture towards my friend Mr. Sintes, which resulted in him attacking the Arab man out of self-defense.
No further questions.
Does the defense have any further inquiry?
No, Your Honor.
You may call upon your next witness.
The defense would like to call to stand Victor Salomon. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Can you explain to the court your relationship with the defendant as well as the first impression that you got of him?
Yes. Monsieur Merceau and I have been neighbors for about 8 years now. He's always been good to me in passing. A very polite man.
So you got a good impression of his character
Yes,
overall?
very much.
Can you reiterate to the court what you had mentioned in your affidavit, that he had his best interest at heart?
Yes. You always tell Monsieur Merceau was a polite man. He loved his mother very much. When I know a lot of people in the neighborhood thought that he was bad for putting his mother in a home, but I know that he has best interest in her heart, in his heart, because he wasn't very financially stable and she could make friends in the home.
Being someone that understands and can resonate with the feeling of grief, do you agree that this can contribute to one's apathy, expression of emotions, or lack of?
Yeah, I lost my wife about 9 years ago now. I was very lonely then, and I wasn't emotionally very stable. So yes, I can relate to that feeling.
Do you believe that this can contribute to one's sense of self-isolation as well
Yes,
as a
of
coping
course.
mechanism of
Yes.
grieving?
Very lonely.
No further questions. You may now cross-examine.
Mr. Salamano, is it true
In my second round of questioning, I really wanted to figure out questions that more so bothered me, like the fact that he hesitated between his first and second shot. So I asked him questions about that.
In your affidavit, you say you felt that all your abilities felt meaningless, and the defendant said that he didn't believe in God.
Yeah, like I said, in the second round of questioning, I really wanted to get his answer as to why he hesitated between the first and second shots. So I asked him that question about like 4 times, and he was never able to give me a response. So I grabbed my crucifix and I let him know that if he repents and he turns his life over to God, he will be able to be saved. And then he let me know that he doesn't believe in God, and I almost couldn't believe it.
During questioning, you said you asked Marcel why he shot a body line on the ground.
Yeah, he was never able to give me an answer.
So he just did not answer the question at all? As the jury can see, although the defense argues that he acted in self-defense and he did not mean to meet the Arab, which could be true, this doesn't explain why the defendant shot the body 5 times after already shooting once, knowing that the Arab was dead, and then shooting another 4 times.
Objection. I demand that you stop right now, because anyone who's put in that situation, like my client has, would be scared and nervous. Of course he shot more than once. He wanted to make sure he wouldn't get hurt. You shoot someone 1 time, we don't know where he was shot. What if he was shot and the airman got up and started stabbing my client? He wanted to make sure that he was safe.
Please remain seated. And you must ask me to speak before you start yelling.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
No further questions.
Before we would proceed, I would ask Mr. Sintes to stop smoking in my court. You may cross-examine.
Can you describe your emotions and feelings, rather reaffirming and reiterating towards my client's lack of faith in religious views?
Yes, it very much took me by surprise. I was definitely in disbelief because everybody believes in God. Nobody can deny the existence. He's just undeniably, everything.
I see. So, do you believe that his lack of faith in this personal belief, which in other words is a mere preference, which everyone is completely valid and has a right to have, do you believe that this is relevant to the occurrences that happened on July 11th?
I do believe that there is some sort of dark entity inside of him. I do believe that that is what led him to perform the acts that he did.
So you believe that this personal belief can be equated with what occurred on this particular day, which is what we are fixating on within this trial?
Yes, I do.
Now, looking at the man who sits before you, do you believe that he can be saved?
I believe he is able to be forgiven. Do I believe he's able to be saved? Not exactly.
Why is that?
How can you save a soul that is trapped by the devil?
No further questions.
Does the prosecution have any further?
No further inquiry, Your Honor.
You may be seated.
We know that the defendant killed this man on this date. We know that the defendant stood and shot a man 10 meters away 5 times, 4 into an already lifeless body. We also know that the defendant asked for the murder weapon, a revolver. Key witness testimony has shown us several things. First, the defendant's lack of emotion. Second, the defendant's affinity for inaction. And third, his willingness to do wrong. The defense has argued thus far that the defendant has acted purely in self-defense. Yet I'd like to remind the jury that for something to be considered self-defense, the defense must prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant was imminently threatened and in face of bodily harm. I do not believe this high burden of proof has been met by the defense. Furthermore, the defense has also claimed that the environmental factors have played a role in the actions of the defendant. I think it is absolutely preposterous that they seek to absolve this crime on the grounds that the sun was shining too hard. A man, aging, was able to stand in a funeral in correct funeral attire. He faced his own medical condition. He fainted. Yet he was able to pay respects to his best friend. Yet the defendant, a younger man, couldn't do the same. Throughout the defense's arguments, they've also argued that the grief and that the grieving process had such an effect on the defendant. Yet I'd like to make known to the jury that it's a multitude of actions that show that the defendant has no regard and no such reverence for his mother's death. He's drinking coffee next to his mother's casket, refusing to see her for a final time. He's smoking cigarettes next to his mother's casket. And he even takes a nap. He takes a nap. This shows such a lack of regard for his mother's death that I think it is completely invalid to look at the emotional effects of said death on the person's actions. Is this the heartbroken and stressed man that the defense makes him out to be? I do not believe so. It's to be argued also, and to be clarified, during the opening statement, the defense has stated that the prosecution is a team, an aggressive team, one that has worked to pressure something out of the witness. Yet I'd like to make clear to the court that the prosecution team has not directly interacted during the questioning process. Ladies and gentlemen, under the Article 12, Section 3 of Algerian law, it is to be known that any murder in the second degree is punishable by death. It is our job as the prosecution to show that this death happened, that this murder was committed, and although the defense argues premeditation, this is simply not one of the charges. We have proved that it is not in self-defense. We have proved that this man, 32 feet away, shot and killed another man. The defense has tried to argue of self-defense, yet at the same time, 32 feet away. I'd like to ask the jury to return the verdict of not guilty, and I hope, of guilty. I'd like to see that the jury return the verdict of guilty, and that the judge rule for the maximum penalty. Thank you, Your Honor.
Kindly ask you to shorten your speech because we already know the verdict.
We just don't have time. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury.